Minasan, today I would like to continue talking a little bit about kenjougo in Japanese. As we already mentioned, kenjougo are the verbs that we use when we're speaking to somebody of higher status and we're talking about our own actions. So we use kenjougo to kind of lower ourselves or lower our close in-group to show modesty or humility when we're speaking to somebody of higher status. So we already talked about the extra modest verbs. These are verbs, a lot of them are the kind of verbs that show up in like a self-introduction. They all have like a special version of them, so they're all like a different verb, like imasu changing to orimasu, or ikimasu changing to mairimasu. And we can use them pretty much in any situation. We don't have to worry about like the relationship of our action to the other person. The group we're going to introduce today are the humble verbs. And these ones are also used to talk about our own actions. But we use them, we have like something we have to pay attention to when we decide whether or not we can use them. So, the humble expressions that we are going to introduce today, once again, we talk about them when we are talking about our own actions, or the actions of our very close in-group. Something that I do. But these ones we can only use when our action has some kind of impact on the person that we're talking to. It has to affect them in some way. So what this means is it's not like we're trying to decide whether to use a humble expression or an extra modest expression. There isn't any overlap between the two of them. What we're trying to decide basically here is whether we should use keigo at all. So these humble expressions, either we use, like one of the humble expressions we're about to teach, if our action has some kind of impact on the person we're talking to, or we just don't use keigo. So, and this is to show both to kind of lower ourselves relative to the person we're talking to, and also to show our respect for them. So, we have a couple of verbs that have like a special word in humble expressions. One of them, once again, we have Itadakimasu. So, in this case, Itadakimasu goes in place of moraimasu. So we learned, 推薦状を書いていただけませんか in 2040. This is the same kind of thing. Itadakimasu, you receive something. So for example, 山下先生にお土産をいただきました. I received a souvenir from Yamashita sensei. So we use itadakimashita to kind of humble ourselves relative to Yamashita sensei. We also use the itadakimashita because our receiving something has something to do with Yamashita sensei, right? I received something from Yamashita sensei. So I wouldn't use itadakimashita if I was telling Yamashita sensei that I got something from my friend. Like if I was saying Miyari-san ni omiyage o, I can just say moraimashita, even though I'm talking to a person of higher status, because what happened doesn't really involve Yamashita sensei at all. We can also say sashiagemasu. Sashiagemasu is the replacement for ageru. So we can say お礼にお菓子を差し上げました. Sashiagemashita as a replacement for agemashita. Our last special verb that we have is ukagaimasu. Ukagaimasu is a replacement for to visit somebody's house, or somebody's office, or to ask a question. So we might say something like, ここがわからないんですが、伺ってもよろしいですか? So, 伺ってもよろしいですか is our like keigo replacement for 聞いてもいいですか? Or, 先生のお宅に伺いました. 伺いました instead of saying I visited ですね. So once again, these verbs I use in a situation where like sensei or like the person I want to show respect to is involved in some way. So, 先生のお宅に伺いました makes sense. But like, メアリーさんの家に伺いました is strange because I don't need to use keigo for Mary. So once again, these are our verbs that have a special case. So もらう、いただく、いただきます。尋ねる, it's not in Genki yet, but like to visit somebody. Or 聞く、伺う、伺います。And あげる、差し上げる、差し上げます。We also have another way that we can make humble expressions. So for the rest of the verbs that don't have anything special, I might say, 先生、本をお借りします。ありがとうございます。So, お借りします。Or, if I'm the driver, I might tell the customers, 駅までお送りします。どうぞお乗りください。駅までお送りします。お送りします。So, kind of like in chapter 19, we had that honorific sandwich. O, verb stem, ni narimasu. We have what I kind of call the humble sandwich in this chapter. So the o plus the verb stem plus shimasu. So o stem. So the stem, remember, is the verb minus the verb in mas form minus the mas. Plus shimasu. We have a couple of exceptions. We'll get to those in a minute. But everything can be o plus stem form plus shimasu except those exceptions. So the ones that are a little bit different will be ones like pseudo verbs. A lot of the time with pseudo verbs, we might say something like 私からお電話します。お電話します。Or こちらをご覧ください。ご説明します。ご説明します。So this お電話します、ご説明します we use with the pseudo verbs. So o or go plus the like noun part of the pseudo verb plus shimasu. Once again, whether you should use o or go really kind of depends on the word. And like the examples we kind of talked about with bikago in chapter 19, it tends to be that the O's go with like Chinese origin words and the O's go with like Japanese origin words and the go's go with Chinese origin words. But it doesn't always work out that way. Once again, you're not going to be tested on whether it's O or go, so I wouldn't worry about it too much right now. It's just something to keep in mind and to listen for when you hear keigo in the future. And as you practice keigo, you'll get more and more familiar with it. So, in summary, these kenjogo verbs are all verbs that we use when we are talking about our own actions. When we are using these humble verbs that we've talked about, so anything that doesn't have a special verb, and those 3 special verbs that I introduced at the beginning of this video, these are cases where we have to think about whether or not that action actually impacts the person that we're talking about. But for the ones that we introduced in the first video, we don't really have to worry about the difference between those. We can just use those special verbs.